Everyone fights the last war. So now what are businesses in the watch industry and what are the watchmakers going to be doing? They're going to be asking themselves, my gosh, how do I limit my exposure to the unpredictability and the volatility of the U.S. market? This is Open Work, a look inside the watch industry, a podcast from Collective Horology. I'm Gabe Riley, co-founder of Collective.
And I'm Asher Apkin, co-founder of Collective. Collective Horology is an independent watch retailer based in Southern California. We carry a wide range of independent brands, including Ming, J.N. Shapiro, Fears, and more. To learn more about us and check out our available inventory, visit collectivehorology.com. Is this our last pod of the year, Gabe?
Oh, yeah, it is. I guess it is. Full transparency, we're recording this on December 23rd. It's our annual yearly prediction podcast. So we'll be not recapping 2025 so much, but looking forward to 2026. We don't rest on our laurels here.
No mailbags.
No mailbag episodes.
Can I have a bone
highlights,
to pick on the
nothing
mailbag
like
thing?
I was the one who pointed out to you how annoying mailbag episodes
and
are.
I think because you pointed it out to me, it really kind of clicked because I was tuning into some of my favorite podcasts. And they're like, hey guys, today's a mailbag episode.
It's so lazy.
And one of them tried to act like the mailbag episode was like a good thing for premium listeners, of which I am one. I'm a premium listener. And I just want to put it out there that it's not. I feel gaslit.
The two things I hate the most in podcasts are mailbag episodes and live podcast recordings. They're just garbage.
Why are you looking at me when you say live podcast recording?
I don't know. You like live podcasts.
I do like live podcast recordings.
I feel like everyone who's in a live podcast is like shouting into the microphone and they just play to the audience in the room versus the, 100 more times more people who are actually listening at home. But all right,
okay.
Enough. All right. So for our end of year podcast, we're looking ahead to 2026, as we always do. Each of us is going to make 3 predictions about the future of the watch industry. But before we do that, as is tradition, because we believe in holding ourselves accountable, unlike some podcasts out there, we're going to recap our 2025 predictions. So these would be the predictions we made this time last year. We're going to see how we did. So Asher, how about I look at one of your predictions, you do mine, and we'll go from there. So I'll start with your first prediction, and boy, were you prescient. You said in 2025, the 1 to sub 10,000 segment of the market was going to be in for a tough time. And I don't know that you necessarily predicted why. I mean, this is a segment of the market that is always going to be the most sort of price conscious, and for good reason. Most people who are buying in this segment of the market, for them, $1,000 to $10,000 is a lot of money. This is the segment of the market that I, as a
$10,000 is a lot of money.
This is the segment of the market that I, as a collector, am generally in. Like, I don't really go above this myself personally, so I totally get it. It's any watch is a lot of money, but compared to the 10,000 and over market, and really I think it's the $20,000, $30,000 and $40,000 and $1,000 and over market where there's a lot less price sensitivity from the buyers. This is where the price sensitivity in watch collecting kind of really sits. And we had heard loud and clear, including from our own surveys that we did last year, that like enthusiasts were just sick and tired of price increases. There was a lot of fatigue with that. And then what do you know happens? Tariffs happen and currency fluctuation happens. The Swiss franc explodes in its relative valuation to the dollar. We were just looking at it today. It's up again, 1.27 Swiss francs to the dollar. So it's only getting more painful. And of course, these things had a huge impact on watch prices. I think we entered a year where the brands were like, we're going to do everything we can to avoid price increases. And then lo and behold, tariffs, currency fluctuation entered the picture, and there was only so much they could do. Of course, they and we absorbed a ton, but there was more pricing pressure than ever on the market. And I think this was a segment of the market that we saw was the most challenged in this environment.
Not happy I got that one right, which leads to, I think, the other one, your first one.
I got this one kind of wrong. Well, sort of.
It depends how you want to interpret it. You predicted there'd be a pretty significant vibe shift in the consumer base. And this one I think is a little nuanced because Yeah, we definitely have seen, some frustration in the market for all the reasons we just discussed.
Yeah, by the vibe shift I was talking about was moving from this place of fatigue, like we were just talking about, to a rebirth of enthusiasm and excitement.
Well, but here's the other side of that coin. I would actually argue that the positive vibes have been more resilient than one would have necessarily expected, given all of the challenges. So you got that one half right. People did actually continue to move in a positive direction. There were just a lot more headwinds than you would have thought. It wasn't just collecting fatigue. It was all of the stuff that we were going through. Regardless,
I would call it not. It ended up being not a vibe shift, but like a vibe roller coaster in 2025. I think and so there were ups and there were downs. So yeah, I got it half right on balance.
Yeah. But, take the win. All right, hit me with the next one.
So, again, you were right on the money. You're 2 for 2 here. Independents to continue their climb and larger retailers to try their hand at indies. I think on both of these, you were absolutely right. I think independents has been a remarkably, not just resilient segment of the market, but it's one, despite all the things we just talked about, that continues to see growth, which is amazing, continues to pick up mind share in collector discussions and in watch media. And then, yes, absolutely, we've talked a lot about this year. We're seeing more and more retailers, from big retailers to smaller retailers who have been traditionally operated in the world of mainstream watch brands and the large holding company brands, increasingly looking to independent watches. So you absolutely nailed this one. And I suspect this is not just a 2025 trend. I don't think it's in your 2026 predictions, but I think this is kind of like a more long-term prediction that we're going to continue to see.
Yep. Speaking of which, your next one around brand consolidation, I'm going to go ahead and, for the Duolingo users out there, I'm going to give you a streak freeze on this one. So I think you're right, but I'm going to delay it slightly and say I think you're going to be right into 2026. We didn't see as much consolidation as I think you had predicted, but I think that it is still a likelihood. So
it's a good thing. I mean, again, think about all these challenges we've had this year, and the brands and the supply chain has been remarkably resilient. It's under intense pressure, but it's been remarkably resilient. I'm glad to be wrong about this.
For sure.
Okay, so your final prediction here was an interesting one. I'm going to give you like a not necessarily like a freeze on this one. I think this is just a more long-term trend than a 2025 trend. So you talked about watch media will collapse and be reborn because traditional revenue and monetization models for all media really, but watch media in particular, we're going to be just not under strain, but like there's just not the revenue, the conventional sort of advertising revenue, or even the revenue from kind of some of the retail stuff that these media companies tend to do to support them. I don't think we've really seen this. I feel like we've seen a lot of stasis in watch media this year.
I think I'm with you on the long term. I think what I meant is what I'm now seeing in my own personal consumption. I'm voraciously consuming unpolished, screw down crown, essentially paid subscription, non-affiliated, and to a lesser degree in one of those examples with unpolished, but certainly true with screw down crown, written by people who have no professional investment in the industry. Obviously, unpolished does. Obviously, Tony has been a part of this industry for a long time and continues to, but he also has lots of projects that he works on. Fahim, the writer of Screw Down Crown, is not remotely professionally associated with the industry, but has become, at least to me, a really interesting and compelling, and you can disagree with him, you can agree with him, but whatever he writes is thoughtful. There is no doubt about it.
And thought-provoking.
Yeah. So what I would say there is I'm consuming that content way more aggressively than I'm consuming more traditional watch media content. So
yeah, you know what? You're right. You're right. I think this is I guess like it continued to happen in 2025 and probably will continue to happen. You're right. I mean, if I think back to the era of 2015 to 2020 or 2022, something like that, I was probably checking Hodinkee multiple times a day.
Yeah.
And now I'm listening to podcasts from independent creators. I'm reading newsletters like the one you just mentioned. I'm watching content on YouTube and Instagram. And I'd say a much greater proportion of my time spent with watch media is on independent creators, and that trend is growing. Okay, so fine, 3 out of 3. I struck out,
let's do
you
2.5.
hit pay dirt.
But I will think it's important to point out too that this isn't unique to the watch industry.
Not
We're
at all.
seeing Substack and YouTube, for example, becoming certainly a much larger percentage of news consumption just in general out there than it was a year ago. I'm not saying that like it's dominant.
No,
you still have the dominant news players, of course, but you know, the amount, like I'm just looking at my own, like I looked at how much I pay Substack annually now just for all the things I consume, not just watch related, and it's hundreds of dollars. So that's a significant change.
So when like the cable and news divisions of Warner Brothers, right? Like, you know, something like CNN and the cable channels and other media properties of Warner Brothers are referred to as, quote, the stub company, meaning kind of like the cigar butt part of the business. It tells you about the state. And I think Comcast spun out their cable and news properties into Versant, I believe. So that's like a separate company now.
It's all owned by the Scheinhart Wig Company.
Yeah. So like traditional or, you know, more traditional media is really struggling in general, and the watch world's not immune to that. And in its place, alternative media has filled the void or offered something that we didn't know we needed, which is kind of cool. So I'm giving you 3 out of 3, man. Good job.
Well, shucks. All right. And then you, in the final one here, said that there are new models for creator monetization. And I think you nailed that one based on everything we just talked through.
Yeah, I don't know, though. I was expecting to see creators explore new ways to monetize. So not just doing like Substack or subscriptions or things like that, but like find new businesses that they could attach to their content. So I was really thinking about, like, an analogy I would give would be like in the automotive industry, Cars and Bids. Doug DeMuro and the guys at Cars and Bids create a ton of really valuable content about cars. And then that is sort of like this advertising vehicle for Cars and Bids, which is the thing that really makes the money, which is an online auction site. And so I don't think I got this one right. I think this is, again, a more long-term thing, and we will see it. But I'm looking for these creators to really find for themselves a more sustainable model for monetization than just advertising or subscribers, which is kind of where they're still playing, at least in the watch world.
Yeah, the only challenge I would come back on that one is to say 2 years ago, the idea of anyone paying $100 a year for watch media was unthinkable. And we're there now with, I'm not saying that, like, I don't even think there's probably 10,000 people that are doing it, but there's thousands. And I think next year probably will be 5 figures.
Yeah, but I'm looking for them to come up with new ways to monetize.
I hear you on that. I guess what I'm trying to say though is it's a ladder. You know, and you're right. No one's made the quantum leap to something that's like wildly profitable, unless you want to start talking about like Loop This, for example.
Well, in fairness, I think we're doing some version of it. Like, we started this podcast 2 years ago. We're now doing it weekly. We've grown the audience massively. We've also invested a ton in original video content on YouTube. We've created hundreds of videos in the last 2 years, and again, subscribers.
There's the gambling site you launched,
and there's my gambling site, my watch prediction. It's not gambling; it's a watch prediction.
Okay.
Watch predictions market. Okay.
Yeah. No, thank you.
No,
for clarifying.
it's regulated in all 50 states. No, but seriously, like, I think we're doing some version of it. Like, we give this content away for free. We ask nothing of it other than if you're thinking about an independent watch, check us out. But I was sort of expecting more people to veer into this territory, and I suspect we will. It can only be this open for so long.
Fair enough.
All right, so I maybe got a D, and you got an A plus. Congratulate! The tables have turned.
Yeah,
here.
That's never happened before.
All right, let's talk about 2026 predictions. I'll start this one. So I'm calling this prediction a pivot to Asia, and what do I mean by that? Well, I think this pivot has two sides. One is, I think it's the attention of the watch industry itself toward Asia, but also I think enthusiasts and collectors in terms of Asian watchmaking. So watches coming from that part of the world. And what are they, if they're pivoting to Asia, what are they pivoting away from? I think they're pivoting away, frankly, from the US market. And I think the US market will rebound in 2026. I think it will be a year for growth in the market now that we have a lot of the tariff stuff sorted.
Well,
This
now
is-
that we hope we have a lot of it sorted.
Well, yes, it's but this is what I'm getting at. Let's just for argument's sake say the tariff stuff is sorted and we've been through the rockiest period of that and we're entering a period of relative stability compared to 2025.
Sure.
For argument's sake, I could be wrong, but for argument's sake, let's say that's the case. You pointed this out to me, which is the scars of that are going to be there. The experience of the industry in the US in 2025 leaves some scars. And this is famous of business and so many other aspects of life. Everyone fights the last war. So now what are businesses in the watch industry and what are the watchmakers going to be doing? They're going to be asking themselves, my gosh, how do I limit my exposure to the unpredictability and the volatility of the US market? Some brands we know, do 70% of their business in this market. And so they have to ask themselves, gosh, I need to diversify. How do I do that? And I think as the US recovers and remains stable, what's really going to determine whether the industry as a whole has an up year or a down year is going to be whatever plays out in China. If China has a good year, the industry is going to have a good year. If China continues to struggle in terms of sales, the industry will struggle. So I think the industry is going to pivot its attention not entirely away, but there's only so many hours in the day, and brands have to ask themselves, which events am I going to go to? What am I going to sponsor? Where in the world am I going to travel to do things like collector dinners or enthusiast meetups? Where am I going to spend my marketing dollars? And I think we're going to see their time, their attention, and their budgets shift from the US to Asia and to China as they look to stabilize their business and hedge against the volatility of the US market. That's kind of the war I think they're going to be fighting. So that's one thing. And to your point, that's kind of a bummer, at least for people in the US to some extent. Like the tariffs may have a little bit more stability now and the trade environment may have some more stability, but we're going to be feeling the ramifications of that going into the future. And the pendulum swings both ways. I think this over time will swing back and forth. Secondly, I think, and look, brands like Ming, Atelier Wen are examples of this. We've talked a lot about the watchmaking capabilities in Asia and in China specifically on this podcast. And I think we're going to see a continued interest from collectors in watches that are from this part of the world in one way or another, whether they're made there. Like Ming is a great example. The watches are designed in Kuala Lumpur, proudly in Malaysia, but they're made in Switzerland. So I'm not, they're not like they're a global watch brand, not like an Asian watch brand, but Atelier Wen, similar thing. It's a Western and Chinese watch brand, but I think we're going to see more and more attention to watch design, watchmaking, and horological objects that emerge in one way or another from the Asia Pacific region, which I think is cool. Like two of the most popular brands we have in terms of consumer attention at Collective in our shop are Ming and Atelier Wen. And I don't think 10 years ago anyone would have imagined that. So I think that's cool. I think we're going to see continued interest in Asia.
I completely agree with that. All right. My first one is around consolidation and investment in indies. What I mean by this is, I think, and we've seen some rumors about this I think probably the one that's banging around the most right now is this idea that that Benny Hamas is going to come back from retirement and potentially buy Debatoon from the 1916 company for his company. But is it
that's the word on the street?
The Honest Tailors Association or
the Good Samaritans Trade Group exactly. Or something? Who knows?
But I think this can go one of two ways. Now, there's a couple of things that can happen here. Look, with the challenges that a lot of indies have faced, it's understandable that investment is going to be, I think, really critical. And if capital continues to stay expensive, then, private investment is probably a likelihood, or consolidation to a larger group, like what Chanel has done, for example, with some indies and in partial investment, taking minority stakes. The question really becomes, is somebody investing because they believe in the fundamental vision of a brand and they're a silent investor who is there to support the business and wants to have a piece of their long-term growth, or because they think that they know better and can take the brand strategically and creatively into a different direction? Now, if I'm being deeply cynical, are we going to start seeing Spider-Man debatoon? I sincerely hope not, but we may end up there if that's what ends up happening. Or what we might see is a silent investor who comes in and continues to support one of the most creative and inventive watchmakers of all time, the full staff at Debatoon, delivering on something incredible. I do think that we will see this. Debatoon is obviously a very large, very well-known, relatively well-financed company as of today. I think we'll see this with much smaller indies as well over the next year. So my prediction, in summary, I think some indies are going to start seeing minority stakes taken by the LVMHs, the Chanels, potentially even the Richemonts of the world. We may also see wealthy private investors like, Benihana, for example, coming in and trying to take control both creatively and financially of these companies because they believe that they can do better than what we see. So I don't know what's going to come of that, but I think the financial pressures of 2025 are going to put some strategic shifts in place.
Yeah, we're seeing some of that, but I think what you're saying is like Chanel is a good example of a group that's invested minority stakes in indie watchmakers. But I think what I'm hearing from you is we'll see an acceleration of that.
Yeah, I mean, Chanel's a great example because from what we can see on the outside, at least, they appear to let I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe they've invested in Journe. I know they've invested in Romain Gaultier. They've invested in Max Booster and MB&F.
Yeah.
And from what we can see on the outside is that they haven't made any aggressive. Yeah, they let those companies run themselves. I think the difference there is that all three of those companies were again, so far as we know, financially quite successful prior to the minority stake being taken. So the question becomes, if the business, isn't as strong as some of those, does that change the dynamic in terms of whoever invests taking a more aggressive role?
Yeah, so this new luxury holding company you're referencing it's actually called the Honorable Merchants Group. And, I read this great book years ago about advertising called Truth, Lies, and Advertising. It's a fascinating book. It was written by a guy who worked at San Francisco ad agency in its heyday, Goodby Silverstein and Partners. These are the people who are famous for the Got Milk campaign, also famous for the legendary Porsche ad, Kills Bugs Fast. In any event, this book goes behind the scenes of kind of those campaigns and others at the agency, and is one of the most fascinating reads on advertising and the psychology of advertising and creativity and how it all works. In any event, this guy who wrote the book, John Steele, posits that the greatest headline ever written was "Will work for food," because it says so much about the person holding the sign. You're more likely to give them your money because you're thinking, oh, well, this is a person who will work for food. They're not lazy. They're showing some grit and gusto. Sure, I'll give them $1, but of course they're just trying to get $1 out of you. And he was like, the worst possible sign they could have held up would just say, "Trust me." And it's like, that's the problem with the Honorable Merchants Group. If you have to tell people you're honorable merchants, are you hiding something? And I'm not saying they are. It's just a terrible name, and that's my problem with that name. It's just so ham-fisted. Trust us, we're the Honorable Merchants Group. All right, enough of my joke around. I'm sure they're wonderful people. I'm sure they've got a great strategy, but I'd suggest.
But you're just not sure they're honorable.
I'm just not. I'm not sure they picked the right name. All right, my number 2 prediction is, and I suspect this is going to be a longer term thing here as well, but I think what we're going to see and hear is more and more attention from the industry on this, more discussion of this in media and among collectors and executives. It's going to come up in meetings. What are you doing about this? And that is the rise of Gen Z. And look, Gen Z is already making their presence felt and driving a lot of taste in the watch industry. Gen Z is a huge part of the shift towards smaller watches, towards shape watches, towards watches with exotic dials, and bringing back a lot of trends that haven't been really present or given much attention or love for 30 or 40 years, which is really cool. But I think they're going to become more and more of an economic force in watchmaking. They're going to reshape some things. So right now, and there could be a lot of reasons that explain this, but like the preferred sales channel, for instance, for Gen Z buyers is in the pre-owned market. They disproportionately buy pre-owned compared to other segments.
What's the source on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the source for that is actually a study that Watchfinder & Co. did. And so obviously, that source has its own bias, but this is survey data they fielded. And it's nuts. So 80% of Gen Z watch buyers reported that they bought their first luxury watch pre-owned. And like to some extent, that's not surprising. I think like your first luxury watch when you were
absolutely.
in your 20s,
it was pre-owned.
You bought pre-owned, but they're naturally geared to this. I've seen this in my own life. So my nephew is in Gen Z. He's 27 and he bought his first luxury watch. It was a pre-owned Cartier. So,
nice.
I think this is like both like where you are in life and where the value is and how you can get, more reasonable or easy entry into a luxury watch, which is generally through pre-owned. But I also think taste plays a role because so much of what they like is kind of retro or vintage in nature and probably available through pre-owned. So I think Gen Z is going to, and their impact is going to be increasingly felt. I mean, Gen Z is now moving into their late 20s and soon into their early 30s. These are, prime kind of purchasing age people. These are people who are going to define tastes, the same way Hodinkee really defined millennial tastes starting 15 years ago. I think we're going to start to see Gen Z really defining and leading taste in watches. And I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about that, both in the media. There's going to be a lot of discussion about it when we talk to brands and we meet with them at Watches and Wonders and Geneva Watch Days. I think a big part of what they're going to be asking us going forward about our own marketing strategy and approach and our customer profiles is what are we doing about Gen Z? And the other cool thing about Gen Z I'll add here is I think women are going to play a disproportionate role in the rise of Gen Z. And I'm seeing this already. Women are look, it's unfortunate, but like women are not a huge part of the cohort for millennial watch buyers, and they're even a smaller cohort for Gen X watch buyers and boomers. I mean, they're not a huge force right now, which is a real shame in the watch community. I am seeing that start to change with Gen Z, and I think that's fantastic. So I think women are going to grow as a force within the watch community and as a force within the industry and driving and shaping tastes. I'll talk a little bit about that in my next prediction, but I think that is a great thing and it's about damn time.
Right on. So this one's a little bit faster, but I think it's going to be a reality. We have seen prices increase for all the reasons that we've gone over. And I think in the mainstream world, that's going to actually result, in addition to the inventory reallocation to countries where there are less barriers to doing business as there are in this current administration, which is going to lead to inventory constraints here in the United States tied to higher prices. So what I mean by that is if we have seen prices increase as we did, I know there's this rumor that Patek is going to lower their prices. I'm interested to see if that happens. We know that Rolex has potentially some price increases coming in early 2026 is the rumor. And I think as the prices go up, inventory availability may come down. And the rationale that I apply for that is if you continue to see increases in pricing, then the only way to make sure that that product continues to sell through is to have less of it. Because if you have a glut of product at pricing that is higher than it was the previous year, then that can lead to some perverse incentives, which can ultimately diminish product value. So where there was 3 date justs, now there may be 1. Where there were 10 day dates, now there might be 5, even if the price of those watches may increase. So I think we may be entering another period of some degree of felt scarcity until and unless there's some normalization of the dollar against the Swiss franc. And as Gabe hopefully posited, more stability, allowing businesses to be more forward-thinking.
Yeah. So where do you think those other watches go?
I think they're going to go to Asia.
Yeah.
Almost certainly. I think they're going to go to India. I mean, India has worked really, really hard to eliminate the trade barriers that have been there for quite some time. So, and I mean, you can't even understate how gigantic a market India is. I mean, there's over 1 billion people in that country. Its GDP is gigantic. They have the buying power.
Yeah. It's interesting. So, I think a lot of times when we say Asia on this podcast and when the industry says Asia, generally it gets conflated just with, China. But the stats are pretty remarkable. I didn't share this earlier, but a full 34% of the global watch market and growing is in Asia. 34, a third of the global watch market in Asia. Pretty remarkable. And the region as a whole, so this includes China, but broadly the region as a whole is growing at a 10.2% compounded annual growth rate, which is remarkable. Markets like Thailand, Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia are growing aggressively. So this is like double-digit growth in those markets. 62% of the 6.5 billion people are under the age of 35. So talk about pent-up consumer demand. I mean, this is a market that is and Gen Z and the role they'll play in reshaping the watch world. Gen Z and the Asia Pacific region are primed to really grow quite aggressively. And that's, of course, compared to a lot of demographic challenges in the US, in the West more broadly, Europe, and even other markets that have been key in the past, China, Japan. Broadly speaking, though, the Asia region is really primed for growth.
I mean, if you want to be even more explicit about it, just in India alone, somewhere between 1 in 5 and 1 in 6 people, the planet, live in India.
Pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I think the projection is like 1.45 billion people in population in India by the end of 2026 against a world population that's just a little bit over 8 billion. So, I mean... Yeah,
it's remarkable. So, okay, my next prediction here, and this is kind of nothing new. I'm calling this the continued quest for novelty. I think one thing I observed, years ago, and everyone's probably going to be like, no, duh, is that watch collectors are constantly craving novelty and, like the next thing. And I think we've seen that. I'll give a couple examples, like, the explosion of like jump hours. A few years ago, like the jump hour complication was kind of this like oddball thing. Like I remember IWC reissued like the Paul Weber jump hour.
Yeah.
And it was met with a shrug. Like people just weren't really into jump hours.
You think that was met with a shrug?
It was met with a shrug. I mean, if they had launched that watch this year, it would have been, the belle of the ball. But it was kind of met with a shrug. But now it's like jump hours are really cool. I mean, one of the most popular Fears watches we sell, probably the most popular Fears watch we sold this year were their jump hours. Christopher Ward has jumped back in on the jump hours, as have many others. So that's what I mean. Like, the industry and really consumers crave kind of like novelty. And I think there's 3 areas in particular, and I'll make my bet here because I couldn't just pick one where I think we're going to see the quest for novelty kind of shift next year. The first is in complications more broadly. I think something like the jump hour is an interesting one that sets this up. Like people are becoming increasingly interested in complications. The Bel Canto is another great example of this. Like I think the expectation is going to be from brands at all price ranges, we want to see how much value you can offer around interesting and unusual complications. So I think we're going to see continued interest in complications, more so than we've seen in the past. I've said this before, I think jewelry watches are going to continue to grow in their mind share. We've seen the small, shaped watches with exotic dials become an area of focus for collectors. And I think the next area is jewelry. And I don't mean like crazy Van Cleef and Arpels level jewelry watches, but I think more gem setting and things like that. I saw this year. One of the most popular watches we sold this year was the Atelier Wen Ancestra, which had baguette indices. And I thought that was going to be extremely polarizing and limit the appeal of the watch. It did not at all. I mean, that thing sold like gangbusters, and was one of the things that people found appealing about the watch. I was worried that like lab-grown diamonds were going to, catch the ire of the enthusiast community, and that gems would turn them off. Did not at all. It was viewed as a strength, not a liability of that watch. So I think gem setting and jewelry watches will continue to grow in popularity and attention. And then the last is 3D printing. I think we're going to see more and more use of 3D printing. A great example from this year was the Ming Polymesh. This was, a mind-blowing exercise in 3D printing. I think a lot of times when we think about 3D printing, especially in watches, it can be kind of crude and limited to cases, not particularly well finished or interesting, and is just sort of like a stand-in for what you could do with other materials or CNC. But, Holtenricks has shown this and Ming has shown this. You can do remarkable things with 3D printing and, sort of additive manufacturing that just simply aren't possible with CNC and other more conventional methods of watchmaking. So I think we're going to see people be more interested in this, looking for more of it, and rewarding more of it. So complications, jewelry and gem set watches, and 3D printing, I think, are all areas of novelty where we're going to see increased interest this year. All right, your final prediction. And I have no idea what this means.
Yeah. So what it means is,
well, what is it?
So in the notes, it says hard pivot to private groups. And what I mean by that is for the last, 8 to 10 years, there has been a tremendous community of people on Instagram in particular, certainly Reddit, focused on watch community in a public style forum or semi-public forum. And what I think we're going to continue to see over the next 12 to 24 months is more and more and more insular modular communities. So, for example, aside from personal watch communities that I'm in, where the groups are in the sort of 200 to 250 member size, I see larger groups after that. So like the Red Bar groups, for example, I'm in one from my time in the Bay Area called 49 Crowns. That's pushing several hundred, so it's above 250. And then I've recently, as of the last year and change, was added to another group, which I participate in, called the Micro Indie Collective. Haha. And MIC, name aside, has also grown dramatically. There's hundreds of people in there. And sure, there's overlap between various groups that I'm in. There's no doubt about it. But these different groups do focus on different corners of the industry. MIC focuses on, sub $10,000, really sub $5,000 watches, mostly. Not entirely, but mostly. Obviously groups like 49 Crowns and Red Bar are all over the map in terms of what they talk about. And then the private groups that I'm in are private collectors. It's anybody's guess in terms of the personal taste of those folks.
But even like the Red Bars and stuff, they're grounded in a geography.
Yeah, but the reason why I bring this up is just from a business standpoint. The inquiries that I'm getting from new clients, for example, a lot of those used to come in on Instagram DMs. Now those are coming to me on WhatsApp from some of these groups.
Oh, interesting.
So this is anecdotal. I don't have quantifiable evidence to say that like Instagram engagement is down, for example. I don't know if it is. Maybe it's up. But just from an anecdotal standpoint, speaking as a watch dealer, I am seeing much more over the last 12 months pivot into those self-selecting groups than the more public forums. I suspect that is a similar trend as to what we were talking about earlier around gravitational pull of Substack, for example, versus mainstream quote unquote media.
This is a much broader phenomenon. I think the watches and the watch industry or watch communities are maybe catching on to this a bit later to some extent. This was something that when we worked at Facebook, the company would talk about all the time, which was, social media, to your point, started as something that was very much like a public forum or like this amphitheater where someone could post and everyone could comment around it, to more one-to-one and what they would call like one-to-many, like group chats and things like that. I mean, this is why Facebook bought WhatsApp. This is why they've continued to invest in it. This is why they've built more chat and group features into things like Instagram and stuff. So this is a broader phenomenon, but you're right. The more that I think about it, Instagram in particular, and YouTube to a large extent, have really dominated watch social media. And slowly and steadily over time, you're right, I'm seeing WhatsApp and other private groups gather steam, which is interesting. It's kind of almost a callback to a lot of the behavior on the forums.
Yeah,
which is
totally.
kind of cool.
Absolutely.
All right, so we'll see. Those are our 2026 predictions. We'll see how wrong I am and how right Asher is in a year when we do our 2027 predictions.
But before we go, I do think, and I mean, I know how I feel when I hear these sorts of things, but I would be remiss if I didn't say it. I want to just put a massive thank you out there to absolutely everybody who listens to this, whether you're a existing client of ours or a potential client of ours, or even just a passive listener. I can't thank you enough. As you've heard us say, if you're a regular listener of this podcast, this is very much Gabe and my life work. And now we can include our friends Jeff Souder and Ellie Panza from operations here and sales here in that list. We take this very seriously, and we know you guys do too. So I just want to say thank you for helping to make this not only a successful business, but a place where I am not only proud to work, but am happy to work. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it was an absolutely banner year for Collective, our biggest year ever in terms of the number of watches we sold, the revenue we did, the people we met, the events we participated in, the content creation. It was it was a mind-boggling year and a wildly successful year. And I don't mean that just like a financially wildly successful idea. That's not why we do this. We do this because, to Asher's point, this is what we love. It sounds trite, but like truly we are living our dream here, being able to do this every day. And none of that is possible without the people who support this business, who support independent watchmaking, who listen to the podcast, who watch the videos, who send us emails, who provide comments, who tell their friends to check this out. So truly from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for doing all of that stuff, because you're allowing us to live our dream, and we don't take that for granted. So for one last time in 2025, this, of course, is Open Work. It's a production of Collective Horology. You can find us online at collectivehorology.com. And please, seriously, get in touch with those questions, that feedback, those suggestions. And to do that, you can email podcast@collectivehorology.com.